Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott, and today we are talking peace in the Middle East. Again, one of the themes of this show and of the last month of war is how much it feels like a blast to the past, for me at least, over the last 25 years of American involvement in the region. It's like, how many times have we heard discussions of peace in the Middle East and we're going to have a deal that's worked out? And this goes back, of course, further than my political consciousness and decades now. But I want to say just off the bat that I'm optimistic and hopeful about what these talks can mean for the war. I cannot tell you how glad I was to hear that a ceasefire had been negotiated. I think that was absolutely the right move. I think it's a good thing. I've been critical of the war since the beginning. I want to see it come to an end. I actually find myself, I think among at least the voices I'm hearing, I'm optimistic about the possibilities of these negotiations. I really do think that the United States and Iran really can achieve mutually beneficial aims here and can resolve a lot of the issues that have plagued our two countries for the last 50 years. That is on the table here. Now, whether or not these possibilities are made manifest is a separate question. Who knows the twists and turns of geopolitics and the role of the Israelis? But I do think there are really positive signs from all parties that there's interest in having peace and in cutting a deal. And I think that in itself is really heartening to see. I want to see a deal. I want to see stability brought to the region. I want to see America disentangled. I want to see just less of the Middle East in my life. And I think that could have been achieved without the war. I don't think this war was necessary. I really think the consequences, a lot of people have been predicting all-out disaster. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think the economic problems will be more moderate and limited, but they will be painful and they will exist. That at the very least, there will be less economic growth than there would have been without the war. And that's complicated to think through, but we could have had it. I thought Trump by January had a lot of wind at his back in terms of accomplishing his goals. I really thought Republicans would keep the House and the Senate. Very plausible that could have happened. The war makes that less likely. I don't think it'll mean a Democrat sweep or something like that, but it's clear that economic issues are the priority right now for the American people. And the war, by reducing the amount of the supply of oil on the global market, is going to cause economic damage. That's inevitable. Wars are costly. They are a consumer activity that does not have any sort of redeeming. You blow up bombs. Well, there they were, right? The loss of American lives, the sheer resources on the logistical supply chains, etc. All of those factors are expensive and costly and bad for us. But to set all of that aside for the moment, it doesn't mean that this is going to necessarily be catastrophic. I think negotiations can absolutely produce for Donald Trump a major foreign policy win. He can secure that right now. I believe that. I think J.D. Vance has a really good chance of getting a good deal with the Iranians. The biggest danger would be internal strife within Iran that leads to insurgency and civil war that makes long-term government of that region impossible. That's the worst case scenario. And unfortunately, killing the Ayatollah, killing a bunch of the leaders of the Iranian regime makes instability more likely, and it empowers hardliners. So I've been critical of killing the Ayatollah. I think that was a really bad idea. The Israeli tactic of assassination and murder as foreign policy is a really bad idea. It's bad that the United States has aligned itself with that model. I don't think that's a good thing. It's just bad, and I would have advised against it if I'd been asked. And there will be negative consequences for taking those kinds of actions by making government officials lawful targets, quote unquote, during war. There's real problems there. I mean, this is complicated, and international law itself is complicated and gives a lot of leeway in terms of defense and what you can do, et cetera, et cetera. The point I want to make is if you just think about this from a common sense standpoint, our goal should be to achieve peace. The best thing that we could have out of this whole deal would be to not be involved in the Middle East. Why? Because our core interests are here in America. The left wing is ascendant and problematic here, right? We have high taxes here. We have a regulatory regime empowered by the worst elements of our society that's empowered here, and we need to undo that. We need law and order in our cities and our communities. We need to enforce immigration law. We need to have a sense of who we are as a nation. We need to prevent the sort of fractures that have really posed serious dangers to our political life, and we need to do that here at home. So all the time and energy and resources spent in Iran, in the Middle East, negotiating deals, bombing targets abroad, and then fighting over those wars here at home distracts from more important issues. And I think there's, and I've seen this more from the pro-war faction, which is that the critics of the war are somehow at fault for the divisions in society over the war itself. And that, I think, is it's getting it backward. You're just not seeing the anger is what's driving the popularity of anti-war voices. And some of them, many of them, are saying crazy things. That's really unfortunate. It's bad for Trump, bad for his agenda, bad for the country. The fight, there's just a lot of grifting going on the right. There's a lot of really insane voices. And but unfortunately, they are able to leverage real political problems in order to grow their audiences and push for the sort of lurid and, again, speculative and insane rhetoric that we see coming out of people like Candace Owens. Alex Jones is all over the place. Tucker Carlson will talk about aliens. I mean, I think Tucker is good in the sense that he's opposed to wars that are bad. I think the advice he gave Trump before the war, more or less correct. That was, if Trump had listened to Tucker then, that would have been good. But Tucker's doing other things that are really questionable. And I think all of this stuff goes together. Talking about the Nephilim and the aliens and demons. And I think, and a lot of this comes out of the crisis of legitimacy around COVID. And this Iran war is another one of those moments that very much goes against the grain of what Trump has run on and advocated for during his political career. No more wars. I'm the peace president. Those were real promises. We want to keep prices low, inflation low. Trump was succeeding in doing that, and at least allowing for the worst elements of the Biden era inflation to go down, and to allow Americans reprieve. There was real tailwinds that were propelling Trump into the midterms. And it's just really unfortunate to see this war, and I can't help but express disappointment over it, but also acknowledgement of the fact that the full-on collapse and denouncing of Trump that's gone on, that doesn't serve any of the goods that the American right is trying to achieve. It's not going to work, and it's not wise. I don't think it's not the right move, and I understand why Trump is angry about that. I also think it's ridiculous to say that people like Mark Levin are MAGA. No, that's not true. Mark is nuts. Basically an agent of the Israeli government in all but the official title. I mean, the foreign policy he's advocating for is not aligned with that of the United States, and his connections to this foreign government in the Middle East, very concerning, right? In fact, really, the level of influence by all of these Middle Eastern governments in our political affairs is really bad for our public life. And it's what I want to see is just less of all of this. The best case scenario is the United States staying neutral in Middle Eastern conflicts. As I've said before, these geopolitical arguments fall flat on their face when you look at reality. The status quo ante before the war, the status quo, what was happening before the war was that the strait was open, oil was flowing, and there was essentially a détente between the major powers of the region. Some shooting from the Houthis. You've also got the Gaza problem. The Iranians are mad, right? They're going to fund their proxies. But of course, there's also going to be the Sunni and Arab countries are also pouring money privately into Gaza and into regional tensions. You've got the Turks doing whatever it is that's going on there. You've got the Syria problem, where you have a former member of ISIS and Al Qaeda in Iraq who's essentially, he's leading the country now, al-Shara. All of this is a problem. This whole region is a mess. It's a mess. It's very difficult for Americans to understand it. The best outcome for us is to get out. And I think the long-term ramifications of America disentangling itself from the Middle East will be regional stability. All of these powers will find the need to come to some kind of modus vivendi when it comes to the way that they interact with one another. The biggest problem, of course, is Israel because of the ongoing tensions over Gaza and the anger that the Arab and the Persian state have over the presence of Israel, their status under international law, the tension over Islam in that region. Again, that problem is really complicated, and it would be better for the United States not to be involved. And my hope is that the negotiations that are happening right now will help us to disentangle to a much higher degree than to just get out of this mess in a lot of ways. I think one of the ramifications of this war, or one of the conclusions I'm drawing, is the vulnerability of American forces in the Middle East. Our bases are not assets, they are liabilities. They are not preserving regional stability, they help inflame regional instability. They are a cause of conflict. So why are we there? What's the utility of having these bases that only for them to get bombed and to be vulnerable in these conflicts? We're losing aircraft. And again, none of this is crippling for the United States. We have vast amounts of military equipment. We've taken far fewer casualties in this war than we took in the first Iraq War, the first Gulf War, for instance. And that was considered a stunning military success. So I think a lot of what's happening is, even though the United States in many ways is more tactically proficient than we were before and have been able to do more with less, at the same time you also see we have strategic and political vulnerabilities that are actually worse than they were before. And those vulnerabilities are worth mitigating and getting rid of. There's so much of again, we could have peaceful relations with Iran. The reason that hasn't happened is due to intransigence on the part of really the American diplomats and the American political system. I mean, it's painful to say, but that is the truth. The fact of the matter is that the reason we don't have peaceful relations with Iran now is due to an inability to come to grips with the fact that the de facto regime in Iran is the Islamic Republic. What is the point of these sanctions? The American view of justice that's animated our system is that there are these rogue states, terrorist states, and we need to quarantine them from the rest of the world. That view of justice is inherently at odds with stability in the region. The Iranians, for one, did desire and still do desire to humiliate the United States because of their own problems. But their other goals include getting rid of sanctions, being mutual recognition. I can see of the 4 of the last 6 Iranian presidents are moderates. And I would say, at least in the sense that they want to have a relationship with the West that is more constructive than what they have now. And their priorities are heavily economic. They want to maintain their national sovereignty, but at the end of the day, this regime, the Iranian regime, is older. They want to stay in power, and they have real domestic pressures that, in opposition to ongoing conflict in the region. And so what is needed now is for a change in the American understanding of justice and a willingness to simply come to the table and say, we are going to recognize the Islamic Republic. We're going to get rid of sanctions. We're going to establish normal, neutral relations with the state. We're going to let bygones be bygones. That's what it will take. And if you do that right there, boom. The future of our relationship with Iran will be highly productive, very peaceful. We can have neutrality. We can stay out of their near abroad. A lot of these problems simply go away. And we can help facilitate some sort of non-aggression agreement between the Gulf states and Iran. All of that is on the table for us. All that's required is the American political foreign policy establishment adopting a new view of justice which accepts that there are other nations. We don't agree with their form of government. We don't need to agree with the way they treat their people. But we do need to recognize they are de facto in charge of that piece of territory. Our ongoing sanctions over humanitarian, human rights abuses, blah, 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 doesn't matter. It doesn't serve our ends. That has nothing to do with the protection of American rights. And what it does do is inflame relations in that region in a way that's unproductive for us. David Frum and George Bush calling Iran the axis of evil in 2002 was destructive of good faith diplomacy. It was pointless and did not accomplish anything that was good for the United States. You had, at the time, the Iranian regime was willing to denounce terrorism. You have Khatami going before the UN, President Khatami, Mohammad Khatami, denouncing terror attacks in the United States. that is in its own, that was a sign of, okay, look, these aren't crazed regime. All this stuff requires that you not know anything about that region. The idea that the Iranians are like Hitler or the Nazis, that's not true. The second largest Jewish community in the Middle East is in Iran. I think Tehran itself has something like 13 synagogues. So that metaphor is not helpful for thinking through this regime. It is much easier to see them for what they are, which is an anti-colonial, primarily Muslim state, Islamic state, that's attempting to, that's trying to preserve its traditional identity in the face of foreign intervention in the modern world. Primarily the Soviets, the British, and the United States. Those are the three, in the Iranian view, that's the primary problem, is that, and especially the British and the Russians. And the traditional view is those states were a much bigger problem for Iran than the United States. And it really wasn't until 1953 that you see real problems developing in the American relationship with Iran. Really, prior to that, Americans had a great relationship there. It's like Morgan Schuster was an American who in the early 20th century helped advise the Iranian regime, the Persian regime, on how to navigate its finances in such a way as to get itself out from underneath foreign dominion. It's entirely a private endeavor, but it was a successful one. It left a good taste in the mouth of the people in Persia and showed American goodwill. So it's not impossible for us to have a productive and peaceful relationship in the Middle East with Iran. Many Iranians felt positively toward FDR after he visited Tehran during the war as part of negotiations with the other Allied powers. FDR was the one member of the three big powers, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, who were there, who really praised the Iranian people and praised the Iranian state and had a positive relationship there. Whatever else I think about FDR, I think the point I want to just leave is that there's plenty of room for negotiation. The United States had basically, we had a Soviet embassy in the United States during the Cold War, right? So why can't we have an embassy from Iran with their de facto government present so we can have productive negotiations? What is the point of these trade sanctions? What is the point of using trade as a weapon? In my view, that's an act of war. Why would we want to keep the war going? The point of war should be to win and then have peace. The idea of a 47-year-long war is absurd. And really, that's not even true because the actual combat and hostilities between the United States has been very minimal. It's usually through proxies at most that you see violence between our two powers, and always in the context of other regional problems. Directly, the United States and Iran could have very productive relations for both powers. There's plenty of, our trade sanctions, really the crazy thing is our trade sanctions are a benefit to China. Why are we doing that? Why are we giving them a negative price premium on oil that they can purchase from the Iranian regime? That doesn't make sense. It's not good for us. It's not good for anyone. It's like, why? Again, why? But again, I'm hopeful because the point is, I believe, just based off of my reading, when I look at the statements of the leaders of Iran, when I read the speeches of the Ayatollah that have been translated into English, what I see is a consistent theme. Their priorities are economic and social. They want to their political priority is the maintenance of their sovereignty, and they want a stronger economy. The easiest way to do that would be to get sanctions removed and to normalize relations with the United States. Third down that list is their anti-Israel view. And the most extreme hardline positions basically calling for Israel to be destroyed. But the more moderate, dominant position in Iranian political life, as far as I can tell, is the view that Israel as a colonial power, they're extremists backed by the United States who are murderous toward Muslims and have created a humanitarian crisis. It is not necessary for the United States to share that view in order to have productive diplomatic relations with Iran. And I think a lot of people get confused and think the Israelis have a lot more power over American foreign policy than they really do. In truth, I think the truth of America's relationship with Israel and with Iran is that the Israelis are very much dependent on us. The fact that Netanyahu had to go to Trump in order to ask for the war shows you who's really in charge. I do not believe, Tucker Carlson in his newsletter came out, hinting that there's blackmail that the Israelis have on Trump. That is a lie. I don't think that's true in any way whatsoever. I think Trump chose to go to war because he found elements of Netanyahu's argument compelling, and they match up with things that Trump has thought for a long time as a kind of like background to his foreign policy thought. Now, I think it's, and it kind of goes both ways. In a sense, I don't think Trump was on board, is certainly not on board with a long-term war in the Middle East. And I don't think, the idea is going to annihilate Persian civilization. Trump has consistently demonstrated a pattern in negotiations where he says really extreme things, then walks it back as part of having negotiations. Trump wants a deal. He's a deal maker. He articulates this as a strategy of negotiating. And whether or not you think it's right or wrong to say the things that Trump has said, the clear pattern that has emerged is that Trump is aiming for a deal. So on the one hand, the Zionist war hawk faction on the right and in American political life is going to be disappointed, I think, by the outcome of this war. Is in the sense of I could very much see Donald Trump signing a long-term peace deal with Iran, praising the Iranian regime, having peace, constructive relations. I really think it's like you could, and I think this is very possible. It may sound absurd, but I don't think it is. I could very much see Donald Trump personally meeting with either with the Ayatollah, if Moshtaba is still alive, the newest Ayatollah. They could get another one, as well, if they could claim he died and they have a new one. Or you can meet with the president of Iran, shake hands, maybe they'll go to Tehran or Isfahan. That could happen. Trump has done stuff like that before, with North Korea being the most obvious example. Trump can absolutely cut a deal. All this tough talk, all this jawing back and forth, saber rattling, big political potential crisis, resolved by Trump meeting directly with the leader, with Kim Jong-un. Well, and I think that was his greatest foreign policy victory. It really just showed that Trump has the personal charisma to cut through the sort of ensconced geopolitical framework and just do something completely out of left field. And in that case, a really good thing, which was functionally normalizing relations with North Korea. For my part, it's like we should have an embassy in Pyongyang and the North Koreans should have an embassy in Washington, D.C. We should have full normalization. We should sign a full peace treaty. For the Korean War, we should really establish genuine peace, diplomatic relations, and to the extent that the Koreans are open to it, trade relations as well. Now, Trump got a huge victory. For my part, and this is from my foreign policy principles, is just the idea the sovereign nations of the earth, regardless of whether or not we as Americans like their form of government, sovereign nations of the earth should have normalized relations except for in periods of decisive war. Like war should be declared, fought, and then ended with a peace treaty, and then combat operations should cease. Why? Because that clarifies then when you have an enemy and when you are a friend. When you are neutral and when you are not. That's really important just for stability and for the advancement of civilization and the protection of our person and property. Is just having clear, normalized relations. The United States and Iran have never been at war because Congress never declared war on Iran. What you have is this weird Cold War situation of tension and aggression where both sides have legitimate complaints against the other. The Iranians are right to be mad about the 1953 coup that the CIA helped back in Iran. That was stupid, and it was a disruption that was a violation of Iranian sovereignty. We would not want that to be done here. Kind of basic golden rule stuff. And by the way, the fear of communism and the Tudeh party that was made, that was all massively overblown. If you look at the history of the 53 revolution, it was the fact that communists, after the Shah fled the country after the initial coup failed, Mossadegh's power was, immense. And so the Tudeh party, which was still officially sanctioned at the time, the Tudeh party advocated for completely eliminating the monarchy. That freaked out Persian conservatives, and it actually ended up reversing the initial effects of the coup where the Shah had to flee the country and brought the Shah back and helped empower him. Brought him back into power fully. So in a way, the idea that the communists could be influential in Iranian politics was a huge misjudgment at the time by American foreign policy experts. It was foolish. It was an intervention in Persian sovereignty that did not benefit the United States and ended up creating a lot of ill will that could have been completely avoided. Mossadegh was more pro-America than other Arab leaders and Middle Eastern leaders that the United States was working with at the time. There's just a lack of seriousness and clarity of thought that created that crisis. At the same time, the hostage crisis in 1979 was a clear violation of international law, and Americans were right at the time to be angry, and it was a justifiable cause for the use of military force against Iran in order to recover those hostages. Now, The problem, of course, is that military operation went really badly, and it turned out that diplomacy and the Algiers Accords of 1981 were what actually resolved the crisis. So when I say on X and in my Substack and my public writing, I support diplomacy, the reason is not because I'm anti-war. That's not true. What I am is in favor of peace that's good for the United States. And having productive relations with the Iranian regime would be good for the U.S. Iran has the ability to be maybe not a regional partner. We don't even need that. And actually, I would say we should avoid those kinds of relationships, treaty relationships. But what they can be is neutral. Just a thorn out of our side. We can eliminate it right now. J.D. Vance and the negotiating team has the ability right now to fix a huge problem for the United States. There's still a huge chance for the United States and Donald Trump to come away with a major foreign policy victory, a huge propaganda victory for Trump. If he comes away with a signed peace deal and happy, smiling, shaking hands, he can very plausibly say, correctly say, I have brought peace to the Middle East. Maybe not fully. I don't see how you resolve the whole Gaza thing, and I'm sure that will be a problem going forward. But the reality is Donald Trump really can bring about a normalization and stabilization of relations for a problem that has been lingering pointlessly in the background for 50 years. That would be great. I think Trump could have done that without war. Honestly, I think it should have been one of the first things he did upon coming back into office the second time. It would have been such a win, I think, to just to be able to move political capital out of that region, military capital. You're taking all the expenditure of money and time and attention and resources and being able to resolve it. Again, I just think that image of Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un is a huge win for Trump. It's a huge win. Just shows Trump can do diplomacy. It would have been great to see that happen before this war. That would have been great. Because again, America's interests are domestic and here at home. Iran can be helpful to us at the minimum by removing a cause of conflict that they want removed. They have incentives to remove sanctions and normalize relations. Whatever the hardline faction wants, they are going to struggle with popularity. The Iranian people do not want to be locked in a permanent Cold War with their neighbors. It's very painful for them. What they want is affluence and economic growth. And that will be delivered by removing sanctions and normalizing relations. So what Trump primarily has to do, and really what J.D. Vance has to do directly in the Islamabad negotiations, is just say, look, we will normalize relations. We will offer you a complete elimination of all sanctions. We're going to reopen embassies in both of our countries. What you need to do is put your nuclear program under international supervision, and you need to allow freedom of the seas through the Strait of Hormuz. I firmly believe the Iranian negotiating team would accept that deal. And just say, look, you can get what you want, which is the political credibility to show that diplomacy works and it's going to result in real benefits for the Iranian people. And at the same time, get rid of the big thing, the nuclear program. I believe fully the Iranians would be happy to give that up. Happy to put it under international supervision for the sake of getting the sanctions undone and to normalize their relations with the West. The idea they're suicidal, eschatological death cult, all of that profoundly misunderstanding what's going on in Iranian psychology. When you look at the willingness of the Iranian regime to negotiate bilateral agreements with other nations, when you look at the way that they have articulated opposition to terrorism, opposition to 9/11, opposition to when they're offering. They've offered, olive branch. Now that was rejected by George Bush for their own crazed ideological reasons. But I think, with all of Trump's tough talk, at the end, Trump is a negotiator. He's a savvy businessman. This is what he wants. He wants to cut a deal, and I think the Iranians can absolutely do that. And I think they want to. I think all these issues can be resolved. Some sort of agreement of the Strait of Hormuz, like the Montreux Agreement, which governs the Bosphorus and the way that ships can transit out of the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, that can be, something like that could be easily negotiated with regards to the Strait of Hormuz if Iran wanted it. I think they've shown their ability to launch ballistic missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, that's a real change in the region. Saddam Hussein did not have that kind of the capacity that the Iranians have now. The cheap drone technology, their missile technology, these are real problems for the region. They show that the Iranians really have a card they can play in order to create problems for the United States and for our Gulf state allies, and for Israel too. They can inflict pain. At the same time, the weakness of their surface-to-air missiles show, they have a long way to go before they're able to, dominate that region in any meaningful way. And the United States, very powerful. The real interest that we have is, we have not been militarily defeated here. The real problems are economic and political. The real problems are prices rising for Americans and domestic discontent with foreign adventurism when we have problems here. But the point is, both sides can walk out of this negotiation right now claiming we have victory. We have victory. Okay. That's what it's going to be. And I think the best would be to say, we're going to remove Iran as a state sponsor of terror, and you're going to stop calling us the Great Satan. I think that's a great way to have peace and normalized relations. Great deal for both powers. Donald Trump could secure a massive, what a win it would be. Imagine this. American flags flying in Tehran as American diplomats set up the embassy there. And you've got handshake between whoever our representative is and, members of the Iranian government. And you say, well, there's all this bad blood. We nuked Japan, firebombed like 5 dozen of their cities. We have great relations now. We have great relations with Vietnam. They abused our prisoners, killed 50,000 Americans. The idea that we can't have productive relations because of whatever tension and we killed these people in airstrikes, get that out of your mind. Hard-headed realism can take the day. The fanatical elements in the Iranian regime are in the minority, and they can be suppressed. I think the Iranian people, and I think what the protests show is not that the Iranian people want to overthrow their government. What it shows is that they want reform and they want economic advancement. And the United States is in a position to deliver that right now. All that is needed is a change in the American attitude toward Iran, where we prioritize recognition of sovereignty and peace as opposed to the older ideological liberal framework of those states are bad because they don't respect human rights, blah, blah, blah. The point should be hard-headed Machiavellian peace, right? Which is to say, our interests are not war. We can have productive relations. We don't care about your domestic internal politics. That's not important to us. You're de facto in charge. We're going to recognize you. We're not going to use trade as a weapon. That's stupid. Iran has a problem with Israel? That's a Tel Aviv problem. That is not a DC problem. That goes in that bucket. They're like, nope, that's a you thing. And why would we put ourselves on the hook for that? There's just no reason to do that. And I think right now, the Israelis need to get slapped. They need to get slapped down. I think Trump's going to do it. I think they're about to learn. The Israelis are on the American leash. They do not ultimately have power, and they're going to learn an important lesson about what it means to be an American satellite. And I hope that I want that to happen. They need to be reminded. They need to be reminded about who's really in charge here. It's not them. It's not them. You can talk about the Samson option and Israel's nuclear, blackmail, blah blah blah. Nope. They know where their bread is buttered, and they're going to get in line with whatever deal that Trump decides to do. And I really do think, just based off of the way that Trump has talked and the way he typically negotiates, I would not be surprised to see a long-term deal. I think it's very plausible. The second most likely outcome would be something like ongoing bombing in the Middle East, Cold War, ceasefire, problems on the Strait, economic problems. I think that would be bad for everyone. I think Trump will avoid that. And people will be like, we're going to have to give all these are all concessions for Iran. That's not the right way to think about this. They're not concessions. This is just normalization. Getting rid of sanctions just makes the relationship between the United States normal, right? Normalization, concessions. This is just international standard. This is just the idea that we're going to just have a normal relationship with these people. That's totally fine. And the idea the American people would be opposed or this is a sign we've been defeated is ridiculous. I think the American military has shown it has not been defeated militarily. We can inflict enormous pain on the Iranian regime. There's no question that if we wanted to, we could inflict starvation tier, famine tier conditions in large parts of Iran. Now, I don't think if we did that, it would be politically productive for us. And I certainly don't think it would lead to regime change. I think that's overblown and dangerous when people say stuff like that. No, that's not how that works. And inflicting pain is not the measure of military success at all. The measure of military success is victory. And what is victory? Peace and prosperity. It's when you have peace that's productive for both sides. And that's just means real. It's just real. And I think Trump is going to get it. I think he absolutely can. At the very least, Trump can get what he wants, which is to say, remove this thorn in his side, get a big win, get a deal, eliminate a lot of these problems. I think the Iranians will be happy to give up their nuclear program. They've done it before. Trump can, and it doesn't, and you could say, well, the JCPOA was a better deal or blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. None of this matters. All of those are subjective judgments. The American people do not care about this war. At most, they grit their teeth. The majority opinion is apathetic. If prices rise higher, there will be anger. There's nothing. Americans are not sitting around being like, the mullahs are the worst. Nope. That's like a DC think tank thing. Only people with college degrees who are overeducated and have a credential and think they know stuff are of the opinion that this war is important to America's interests. So that's a DC attitude. Or it's a narcissistic, whatever, it's ethno-narcissism or bizarre religious fanaticism about supersessionism and blah, 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 and whether or not Israel and the covenant and, that there's that faction too. But the core point for most Americans is that this war is a kind of thing to be tolerated and looked at askance. It's not popular. It's good if it would end soon. Trump getting a big deal would be awesome. If he gets the Iranians to give up their nuclear program, which is what they're going to do, if he signs and gives Iran a loan or helps them reconstruct, he can claim regime change. All of it's plausible too. I mean, what is the regime? Look, the meaning of words can always be massaged, and there's lots of room. There's a lot of runway here for Trump to do a lot of different things. I think the Iranians are be happy to deal. They do not want the ongoing suffering from the war. They'll grit their teeth and go through it if they have to. But I think what they really want is a long-term deal. Trump has every reason to give it to them. A lot of the Iranian requests, the crazy requests, like setting up a toll booth on the Strait of Hormuz, that can all be negotiated through. There could be some kind of convention. The tolls could be low. You could modify the law of the sea. I think it's a bad thing, but okay, fine, if you really need to. Again, what I just want to say is, as much as I think this war was a bad idea, as much as I think we could have gotten everything we need and want without it, at the end of the day, Trump has the opportunity to get a big win. He can get a big win here. He can come away with a long-term deal. He can remove this thorn in our side. He can normalize relations. I think he should. I think if I were advising J.D. Vance, I'd be like, look, just tell them, give them a deal they can't refuse. Give them a deal where it's like, we will grant you diplomatic recognition. You can establish an embassy. We'll get rid of all the sanctions. All you have to, and we'll give you a non-aggression pact. We'll get some sort of multilateral agreement with the Gulf states. We can totally do that because they're all our pets. They'll do whatever we tell them to do. We can deliver all of that to you right now if you give up your nuclear program. Oh, and by the way, we can set up something similar to the Montreux Agreement on the Bosphorus. All that means is commercial shipping is freedom of the seas, but warships can't move through during time of war. Something like that. Which, by the way, would be good for us because we don't need to be involved in the Persian Gulf. That is not important to us. It's not oil supply, China, geostrategy, 7D chess. No, not important. We have plenty of ways of getting around some sort of crisis in that region. Plenty of ways. It is not necessary for us to manage a global empire to be wealthy and powerful. We can be very powerful. We'd be more powerful without the vast expense of our overseas holdings that the American government owns. So again, J.D. Vance says he's holding the cards. He can give them what they want, make them an offer they can't refuse. Basically say, look, you can walk away with a huge propaganda victory right now that you've gotten a deal with the United States and achieved your aims, and we can walk away saying we've gotten the elimination of their nuclear program, and we've gotten a normalized deal. We've secured peace in the Middle East. And honestly, I think Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize if that happens. Give it to him. That'd be great. I hope it happens. That's what I'm rooting for. Again, I can't predict the future. My predictions could be wrong. Fair enough. And if that happens, then it just means I need to learn more. It's just more of an opportunity to think. But right now, what I see is a lot of hope for a better future in the Middle East. That's what I'm praying for. That's what I'm hoping for. My heart is with the American negotiators. I want to see peace. I want to see prosperity. I think we can get it. And, that's where I am. I am for President Trump getting a huge win here. And that And I hope it happens. I think, in fact, that it will. So anyway, on that note, we're going to close out today's show. As always, it's been an enormous pleasure. I want to encourage you to engage with these arguments. Like, share, subscribe. This show is designed to help you think. It's here to help just clarify the issues, to provide a voice of sanity in a world that seems so often to have gone completely nuts. But and as always, it's just a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening. Without the listener, none of this would be possible. It wouldn't be worth it. You are the reason that I'm doing this, and I'm grateful. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Substack, Regime Critic, on X at @JLippincott_. You can also find me on the YouTube under Lippincott Talk. Again, this has been an episode of Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott. God bless. Keep the faith.